terrorism in general, particularly what's come to be known, unfortunately, as Islamic terrorism, which is a misnomer, naturally. But we have a tendency in the United States, because of our media, to assume that Muslims are by nature terrorists.
Yeah.
This is something that we have to work against and try to elucidate the reasons for this kind of thinking. But there was an organization back over 1,000 years ago called the Hashishin, or the Assassins, from which we get the word the Assassin's Cult. And this was, I wouldn't say the first terrorist organization, but probably the first intelligence operation. Here we have a group of Shiites, a disaffected group of Shiites, actually, a strange sect within Shiism, who were called the Ismailis. And this group of Ismailis in particular were the Assassins, run by a man called Hassani Sabah. And he was able to overthrow governments, foreign governments around him, by sending assassins in to kill their leaders, or at least to threaten them. And he trained his people very well. They spoke different languages. They dressed appropriately for the people they were presuming to be. It was an excellent terrorist intelligence operation, if you will. So we had, roots of that kind. But then to jump from there to 9/11 is a different story for me.
Yeah,
I see the same sinister forces at work there, with nothing to do with Islam. If we think back to the Columbine school massacre, for instance, here's a good example. We have these school children in high school murdering all of their classmates and teachers in the most horrific case of a school massacre in our history in the United States and Colorado. And they had planned on their websites, one of their plans after the massacre was to hijack an airliner and fly it into the World Trade Center.
Oh, really?
And they had planned this a couple of years before 2001. And then there was a short-lived television series called The Lone Gunman.
Yeah.
It's produced by Chris Carter of The X-Files. And these were characters from The X-Files, the lone gunman who ran a magazine, a sort of conspiracy theory magazine. And the very first episode of The Lone Gunman involves flying an airliner into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
So, to me, this is evidence of the sinister forces at work.
Yeah.
This was planned in advance, but not necessarily by those 19 men who were flying the planes, and not necessarily by Osama bin Laden. It was in the wind. It was being created in human consciousness before it actually took place. Or conversely, the event that took place sent ripples throughout space and time, essentially throughout the past and the future, which is an idea in quantum consciousness that events send ripples in both directions, both into the past and into the future. So it's perhaps possible we were seeing the event before it happened.
I mean, yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I've been pondering that back and forth also regarding the fact that, they, in quotes here, actually have to kind of, as you say, plant these events in the form of fiction. And if that is the case, do you think that helps to make an event that they actually want to have real to become more real, or actually that someone, I guess, is I guess we could be talking about copycat effect and so forth and all of that, but considering that the timeline here is so very short, I think the Lone Gunman was the same year or something like that. So I mean,
yes, about a year. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, do you think that this is in regards to the magic, as we spoke of earlier, could this be one of the methods, so to speak, that they actually plant this in fiction form first to make it real later?
Well, we're going back to Lovecraft again. Lovecraft, in his stories, wrote about the artists being the first ones to sense an event before it happened, and unconsciously recreating or creating the event in their art as a prefiguration of what was about to occur. It's either what came first, the chicken or the egg in this case. I'm not exactly sure. However, there's another example. We had an occasion back in the 1960s where a young Marine went up into a tower in a university in Texas, and from the tower of that university he started killing people using a sniper's rifle. He started shooting people at random until he was finally captured and killed himself, I believe. This event was prefigured in a novel that was written a couple of years before, almost down to the exact detail, including the name of the captain of the police force that apprehended him and stopped the massacre from occurring. This kind of thing happens. And Is it a question that the forces that be are creating a fictional reality as a kind of template, as a kind of magical ceremony? You know, it's a little bit like sticking a pin in a doll and hoping that the person will then feel pain.
Yeah.
The old spellcasting technology.
Voodoo,
Is it the same thing? When we write a story, when we write fiction, are we creating a possibility for these events to take place a little bit later in the future? Are we responsible then for actions that take place later? The question of responsibility is one that concerns me a great deal. You know, are we responsible for creating it, or are we simply seeing in advance the events that are going to take place?
Yeah.
And that's a question that has yet to be answered, but it's a question on which the whole practice of magic relies, I believe.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things also, I guess, that is interesting in regards to our modern culture is, of course, if we're going to numerology and this kind of stuff, I guess we could connect this with Kabbalism in one level or another. Is numerology or Kabbalism anything that you go into in your books?
Only briefly here and there, just for when it turns out to be interesting. For me, Kabbalism itself is an area of intense fascination for me and study. The idea that by using words and by permuting words, we can cause change to occur in consciousness. I mean, this is what Hollywood does every day. This is what Madison Avenue does every day. We are constantly using words to alter reality, to create virtual realities. And we do this as writers. Obviously, anyone who writes a book or an article is attempting to alter the reader's reality to a certain point or a certain extent. And a radio program like this does the same thing to its listeners. There's a kind of a collaboration that takes place between a reader and a book, or between a listener and a radio program. So there's a kind of Kabbalah that's at work there in that sense. So that does fascinate me, the idea that the written word can be used to effect change, which is what the Kabbalists believe. They believe there were codes built into the Bible, of course, to the first 5 books of Moses. So the idea that there was coded information that we don't quite see is something that it's the world we live in today. I mean, we live in a world where we believe that we're not being told the truth exactly, and we're not being lied to exactly. We're being given the information, but it's in a coded form, and we have to decode the code. We're trying to decode 9/11. You know, there's a lot of groups out there who have serious reservations about the official story about 9/11, and those reservations are compelling.
Indeed.
The Tower 5, why did that go down?
I mean, Building 7.
To take that down, et cetera, et cetera. How did the towers really fall? Was that logical that they would fall straight down the way they did? On and on and on. There's a lot of data there. So we think we're looking at events that have coded information, that there's a secret message being sent to us, or that's embedded in historical events, embedded in the texts that we receive, whether it's a CNN news broadcast or an ancient book on Kabbalah. Where's the information coming from? What does it mean? And how urgent is it for us to decode that message?
This seems to be, I don't know if you have any take on this and so forth, but kind of there's a lot of people, acting up regarding the year 2012 and all of this, and in regards even, I guess, to the 9/11 event, in regards to that we're, I guess, living in the end times in that sense, whatever that might mean for people interpreting that term. But in regards to your own view on that, Peter, have you kind of, do you think that there's a program running in that sense that actually is coming to its close? If I am to ask you that question.
Well, that's another tough question. 2012, of course, has figured for a long time, and I've been looking at it, and a lot of others, people that I know, have been looking at it as well. We're trying to understand it. Obviously, according to the Mayan calendars, this is an important date. It does signify the end of a major cycle. But what does this mean? When we study astrology, for instance, cycles begin and end without, tragic events necessarily occurring. We don't know. We feel that we're in a period of tremendous decline, environmentally, spiritually, and otherwise. We feel there is, a reckoning of some sorts coming up. But I have to hasten to point out that we've gone through this before. We've gone through this with the year 2000. Various religious groups go through it all the time, figuring by their calculations the world's about to end, and it just doesn't. So I'm trying to be optimistic about 2012, quite frankly. I think it's the only way I can wake up in the morning, so I'm trying to be optimistic and feel that maybe 2012 will be the end of a cycle, but it might be the beginning of a better one, and that's what I'm hoping for. So I don't want to frighten anybody with all sorts of dire predictions. I simply don't know. I've listened to the psychics, of course, and I know there's all kinds of predictions of world cataclysms and that sort of thing for 2012. There will be, alignments of planets around that time, I believe in May, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not entirely sure that's all going to be a bad thing yet, and I think it needs a little bit more research. And anyway, we're only a few years away.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure.
I think we're going to find out long before we're able to finish the data gathering.
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to hear what people think of 2012. It's part of the I guess collective undercurrent in that sense. I mean, I've been elaborating on this with previous guests on the show that either the case, as we were speaking about earlier, this is such a big part of many people's life now, so they're focusing on it so much so that something might actually happen on that point just because of that.
Well, that could be it. I mean, just like all of the other things we've been talking about, when you create the template, you create the idea in people's minds, and sometimes things happen because of that. Maybe everything we've been discussing is like that or stems from that. It's an occult kind of thing. But remember all the consciousness we had about the year 2000 and the 2000 bug, the Y2K bug, and everything coming to a grinding halt and nothing happened. So it's possible that we have this idea in our head that there is a date in the future where things are definitely going to change. And we're projecting this. But 2012, remember, is a South American calendar observation. I don't think it's really been supported by Western calendar mythology, shall we say, for instance, Kabbalistic calendars or the others. I'm not certain. I'd have to really look into it a bit more. But it could just be this is one group that sees it that way, and it may not be reflected in other mythologies around the world. So I don't know what to say. I'm going to wait and see like everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. It's a very difficult subject in that sense. I totally agree. Another thing, I heard your interview with Whitley on Dreamland. I can remember about 6 months ago, something like that, maybe.
Okay.
Anyway, in that interview, you spoke a little bit about, you went into a little bit more about Hollywood, and the one thing that I kind of reacted to was that there are different acting techniques in regards to, I guess you were referring to mind control methods and the way that actors use their techniques to get in the mode of their characters and so forth.
Sure.
Maybe you'd like to elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, I found acting itself and the process of acting fascinating for that reason. Stanislavski, of course, created what we know as method acting, and Stanislavski spoke a great deal in his writings about mysticism. He referred to Indian Hindu forms of mysticism a number of times, and he compared what he was doing to a kind of mystical state. And I think when we talk about method acting, we're talking about a person who puts their consciousness entirely in the consciousness of that character. So they alter their body language, they alter their speech patterns, they do everything. They create histories in their mind for the actor, which is not written in the script, but they develop this entire life story for the actor so they can become the actor completely and lose their own sense of identity. This to me is a kind of voluntary possession, or what I refer to in Sinister Forces as voluntary madness. We undergo willingly dislocation of our personality. We create an alternate personality. And my reading of the